Hi, I'm Caden here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 14 recap for the 2024 NFL season. But before we jump into the recap, just a couple of quick updates on the injury side of things. Two starting quarterback injuries, with Aiden O'Connell coming back with a bone bruise in his game last week, who will not be out for the season now, but will miss at least a couple of weeks. And with the Raiders are standing wise, he really might as well just stay out for the season.
Yeah.
I don't really know. I don't really know if it's
Oh,
worth
it's
it
good for him to get
in.
some reps because who knows who their quarterback's going to be next year. They're going to have a top 5 pick more than likely.
That is a hell of a point. Very true. He might be playing for his career those last couple of weeks. And then Derek Carr will also miss several weeks. I don't really know if his falls season ending or falls several weeks and like playing the last couple of weeks. But same situation for the Saints. Right now, they're sure not looking too good playoff-wise either, so it might not matter too much in the long run anyways. But we'll have to see what ends up happening with those two teams. And then now to the defensive side of the ball, to defensive injuries. Antoine Winfield Jr., safety for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, will officially be out for the entire season, as well as DeMarvin Overshown of the Cowboys will be out for the rest of the season. So some big injuries there to some starting quarterbacks and star players on the defensive side of the ball. Always hate to see it, but it's sadly just part of the game. So now rolling things forward into the happier news and the recap of last week, starting with the Thursday night football game and the Green Bay Packers game. The Green Bay Packers traveled to Detroit to take on the Detroit Lions, and the Lions protect Ford Field and get a win at home by a score of 34-31.
Yeah, it was a really good game, just a tough result for the Packers. Jordan Love looked pretty good. He went without an interception again or any turnovers, so that's always good to see. Josh Jacobs had 3 rushing touchdowns, which usually when your running back has 3 rushing touchdowns, you win, but you're not always playing the Detroit Lions. It was definitely one of those shootout type of games. Jared Goff had 2 touchdown passes to Tim Patrick. Who saw that coming? You know, Tim Patrick being the star of the Detroit Lions Packers game. Not St. Brown or Jamison Williams, who had just a light impact on the game. And then Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery were kind of held rather in check. They had some plays, some big plays, but nothing spectacular, and they didn't stack a ton of yards. So that was good to hold them in check, and it'll be interesting to see if we see these guys again in January.
Yeah, they each pick up a touchdown they being Jamison Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs. But like you said, really yard-wise, they didn't have too much of a change on the game. Jahmyr Gibbs' touchdown was a short catching touchdown, and David Montgomery's touchdown was a short rushing touchdown, each within the 5-yard line. So just kind of getting their normal running back touchdowns that you'd see. But yeah, Calvin touched on it a little bit, but I saw a little after, like in the locker room post-game type video thing, and the 2 game balls in that game went to Tim Patrick for having the 2 touchdowns, of course, and then Jake Bates for hitting the game-winning field goal. So if you would have said that the Lions won in a shootout against division rivals Packers and the 2 game balls went to Jake Bates and Tim Patrick, I'd have called you crazy. I would have said time travel isn't real, but the dominoes just fall that way sometimes. I mean, there's a whole nother way you can look at that, saying the fact that guys like Tim Patrick and Jake Bates are stepping up and making that much of an impact just continues to show how dominant the Detroit Lions have really been this year. When you got guys like that who can come in and make those huge plays and get you those wins, and you don't even almost get like a rest game, for lack of a better term, from some of your stars like Amon-Ra St. Brown, that's pretty cool to see for the Lions and something that's really promising for that fan base in general. I don't think this is any sort of a loss for the Packers to hang their hat on. It was a really good game, and they played really well on the road against what is probably the best team in the league at this point. If you talk player for player, pound for pound, they are just doing so well this year. So not a bad loss for the Packers, though a loss in general, and a very good borderline statement win for a statement team in the Lions.
Yeah, I really hope to see them in January. I would like to get one more shot at them because each game has been pretty close. Even with Jordan Love injured in the first matchup, that was still a close game. I think one more shot at them, we could get them.
It is hard to beat any opponent. You talk about anybody in the league, it's hard to beat them 3 times. Well, I guess divisional opponents are the only team you face 3 times,
Right,
but you talk about any team in the league, it's hard to beat them twice. So when it's a divisional opponent and when you're facing them that 3rd time, it just force multiplier. It is so much harder to beat a team 3 times in the same year. So now moving on to what was the Vikings game and also marked as the game of the week last week, as it was Kirk Cousins' return to Minneapolis in US Bank Stadium. We had the Atlanta Falcons traveling on the road to Minneapolis in US Bank Stadium to take on the Vikings, and the Vikings pick up a win by a score of 42-21, which when you read that, you think, wow, they just dominated them. They did not dominate the game, though. They put up 21 points in the 4th quarter. Heading into the 4th quarter, this game was tied 21-21 and one of the closer matchups of the entire week last week, point-wise. And then the Vikings offense just erupted because the Vikings defense did nothing but hand them the ball. There was a streak there in the 4th quarter where it went passing touchdown, interception, passing touchdown, interception, passing touchdown, which of course, judging by the score, you know the team with the passing touchdowns and you know the team with the interceptions in that case scenario. Kirk Cousins did not look great at any point in this game, but he was putting his team in a position to win the game. He was really accurate with the deep ball. Darnell Mooney had like 3 catches for almost 110 yards at one point, which just shows that he was locked in on the play action game in the deep ball. But then those back-breaking interceptions, and when you have those back-breaking interceptions against a good team like the Vikings are going to take advantage of that. You're not going to be able to get away with back-to-back interceptions like that. So it was, of course, just the turning point of this game. 21 points in a quarter will always be a turning point of a game, but that was really the biggest reason for the turning point of the game. Not only giving the offense the ball back, but just giving them so much momentum for that many drives in a row. And the Vikings continuously just making them pay for those mistakes was awesome. Sam Darnold had 5 total touchdowns with this game. Justin Jefferson picked up 2 of those, and Jordan Addison picked up 3 of those. So really just kind of cementing themselves as one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver duos in the league right now. And it was just, I say this every week about the Vikings, that I want to see them play a full game. And to be honest, I think this is probably the closest we've had to a full game all year. Of course, that 4th quarter was the highlight, but we actually did have a touchdown in every single quarter, 1 touchdown in each quarter up until that 4th quarter eruption. So I think this is the closest we've been to playing a full game. There was still a lot of things I saw that I didn't like from the Vikings. Biggest thing being how much pressure Darnold was under against one of the worst quarterback pressuring teams in the league with the Atlanta Falcons. You hate to see that, but sometimes those young guys like that and those rotations like that just kind of catch you off guard, and that's what gets you more than anything. So fingers crossed that's what the situation was here, but overall, great game by the Vikings.
Yeah, it really was a good game by the Vikings, and it was the game that kind of proved they had made the right decision maybe, because they cut ties with Kirk Cousins last offseason, and they didn't sign him to that big offseason contract. The Falcons did. So the Falcons are kind of kicking themselves right now because Kirk Cousins right now leads the league in interceptions. So that is not a good stat to have. And they are looking to possibly trade him next offseason and turn to Michael Penix Jr., who they drafted last year in the 1st round. So that'll be interesting to see if he ends up getting a shot at all.
Yeah, exactly. Even more than kicking yourself over the money, kicking yourself over the years on that contract. Was it 4 years?
4 years.
I believe it was 4 years. All guaranteed. Kirk Cousins, you want to know who the MVP of the NFL is right now? Is Kirk Cousins' agent, because that man should be enshrined somewhere. I don't know if I don't know if he can go to Canton. I don't know if he can go to the NFL Hall of Fame if they have a little agency corner that he can go into.
Have an agent's corner.
But he deserves to be there if it is, because the amount of guaranteed money Kirk Cousins has gotten in his career, it's mind-blowing. I digress. It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go into if you have time. But it is just so funny.
And one thing about the Vikings defense and them forcing those interceptions on Kirk Cousins, they now lead the league with 20 total interceptions this year so far. So
just interceptions or
just
turnovers?
Interceptions.
There you
20
go.
total interception. I saw that stat earlier today. So that is very interesting for the Vikings, and if they can continue that process or continue that progress, look out for them in the playoffs.
Yeah, for real. That's how you win Super Bowls is good offense and not even good defense, but just turnover creating defense. It's what so many teams rely on. So now, as I mentioned, that game was also marked for our game of the week last week. So moving on to the game of the week that Cal and I each pick, starting with his and an AFC matchup of the New York Jets heading down to Miami to take on the Dolphins, and the Dolphins picking up an overtime win at home by a score of 32-26.
And I don't mean to keep picking on the Jets here, but it's kind of easy. They played a really nice game. They forced the Dolphins to drive down the field with less than a minute left and kick a game-tying field goal. And then a coin flip gave the Dolphins the ball first, where Jonnu Smith caught fire and went off for, I believe it was 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. So where he had no targets and no catches up until that point. So that's funny that overtime was where he decided to show up at.
Hey, he was just saving his strength.
Yeah.
He was the least tired person on the field.
Exactly, the most crucial moment. So that was when he stood up as a clutch time. And, Rodgers went over 300 yards for the first time in, I think, 2.5 years. So really, it was a nice game for the Jets, but just they continue to find ways to lose. And by letting the Dolphins kick that 50-yard field goal, they allowed the coin flip to decide their fate, and the Dolphins were able to beat the Jets in overtime and add another loss to Aaron Rodgers' Jets career.
Yeah, I mean, we say it all the time about the good teams. What makes the Chiefs the top team in the AFC? What makes the Lions the top team in the NFC? It's finding ways to win. Even when it looks like you shouldn't win, even when you haven't played well enough to win, it's finding ways to win. And the Jets are just literally the dead opposite of that. Callan said it. They find ways to lose. They find ways to play well, go against a good team like the Dolphins at home and play well, and still find a way to lose. And when that happens, there's just nothing you can do about it. But yeah, this was a really good game by the Dolphins as well. I didn't get to catch much of this game. I actually just pretty much all I really caught was the 50-yard field goal to tie it up and send it overtime. And then the Jonnu Smith stuff in overtime, of course. I think it was only 3 catches, which is almost even more impressive.
3 or 4.
Yeah, I think it's like 3 catches, 50-some yards, and a touchdown, which I think even makes it more impressive that he did it in a whole 1 less catch, or took a whole 1 less catch to do it. So I won't touch on too much else of this game just because I didn't see much of this game. But I know Jason Sanders had a really good game and, of course, hit that big field goal to give him the tie and give him the chance to win in overtime. Now moving on to our final game for this recap episode. We have my game of the week from last week, which was probably the game of the week of last week and possibly the game of the year from last week because it was a barn burner. We had the Buffalo Bills heading to Los Angeles to take on the Rams, and the Rams picking up a win at home by a score of 44-42. Now, I was actually at a Christmas party during this game, ironically, but I wanted to talk about this one because, of course, it was such an amazing game. And I wanted to talk about it from my perspective as a fantasy owner because I think it's kind of a funny story. But going into this game, I was up by however many points it was, but you know how fantasy always gives you the percentages to win. I was at an 85% chance to win my game. And I sat there and watched this game, not by scores, but by Josh Allen, specifically his score, and just watched his score slowly climb up and up and up and up. And if you want to talk about hero ball, putting a team on your back, Josh Allen did that for not only the Bills, but for many fantasy owners in the world, because I ended up losing that game that I had an 85% chance to win at the start of the day. But that was my little sob story. Now to talk about the real life part of it. Josh Allen put up not only 3 passing touchdowns, but also stacked it with 3 rushing touchdowns. But even that hero ball, even that Superman cape getting thrown on, just was not enough to beat the Rams. Because the Rams did not have a hero ball. They had a hero committee. Matthew Stafford Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua all absolutely went off. They all played a really solid game. Nacua being the biggest of that group right there and really the star of this game for that Rams offense. So if you want to talk about just an absolute scoring fest and an absolute, I guess, hero fest is what I can call it at this point with the way I've been talking about the game, this is one of the best games that I can think of in a while.
This
and
was really fun.
It must have been good because, like I said, I barely watched it. I just caught highlights and like 2-minute clips here and there. And it was still such an amazing game to watch. So I couldn't imagine watching the whole thing live.
Yeah, it was really fun to watch. I watched most of it live. Well, I watched it on Red Zone up until the really towards the end when the Bills were able to come back and make it a 6-point game at one point. Or I'm sorry, a 7-point game at one point, and it forced the Rams to go for 2 and miss their 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter. So it was really fun to watch from beginning to end. Matthew Stafford had a great game. Kyren Williams, you can't forget to mention him. He had another good game and another touchdown. I think he had 2 more touchdowns. So nice. He continues his stellar season where he's scored all 12 of the Rams rushing touchdowns. So he's the only Ram to score rushing touchdowns so far this season.
And even giving Blake Corum a chance.
Nope. So he's just scarcely used. So it'll be interesting to see how much he really makes an impact if the Rams make the playoffs, because they're going to be one of those teams that are scary to face in January.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm happy you kind of mentioned playoffs because, I mean, you got to look at the playoff picture. We're at that point in the year, and the Rams needed this one. It was going to be looking real dire for them if they dropped to 6 and 7. They're not even in the wild card right now, but there is so many teams hanging around that 6 and 7 area that are fighting for a wild card right now. And the Rams just automatically put themselves above of all of them. We actually just looking at this right before we started, and the Rams are the only 7 and 6 team in the entire league, which is really random, but it's kind of funny that they're one of 32 teams that are 7 and 6 right now. But especially at this point, having that 1-game advantage is so huge, and it keeps them only 1 game behind the Washington Commanders, who currently hold that 7 seed at 8 and 5. So very huge win for them, both player-wise, opponent-wise, and playoff race-wise. So that was our NFL Week 14 recap episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure you stay tuned until tomorrow for our Week 15 prediction episode. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.